I've got two short questions of information, please, on Malaysia and Germany. Forgive me, Uma. Malaysia and Germany are both countries with levels of unemployment that we can only fantasize about in South Africa. 3% in Malaysia, and Germany is presumably much the same. So these are very low unemployment economies where poverty is linked to low wages, working poverty. And raising the minimum wage is clearly a sensible policy intervention, right, or has setting a national minimum. Right? Now, the level at which they were set, I wonder if you could give us a bit more information about that. So in Malaysia, you said that the level was set through the formula. You went through that very quickly, and I didn't quite understand how that formula really worked. If you could tell us a little bit more, what proportion of workers were covered? I missed that. And as a simple rule of thumb, what proportion of the median wage was the national minimum eventually set at? So the formula, the coverage, and the proportion of national median. In Germany, you told us it affects, more or less 15% of workers benefited, which is very similar to the direct and indirect coverage of the British minimum wage that Alan Manning told us about yesterday. So about 15%, you said it was about 50% of the median, right? But you didn't tell us very much about the thinking behind setting it at €8.50 as opposed to, for example, higher, right? Why wasn't it set at €10 per hour? Right? What were the considerations that led to it being set? And one other thing I wonder if you could just comment on. My understanding is that in the German case, the reason why the CDU swung behind the minimum wage initiative, why the Conservative government supported it, was in large part because the German social security system was paying what are in effect wage subsidies to low-wage workers through the social security system. And they really wanted to replace wage subsidies with higher minimum wages so that the cost was transferred from the fiscus to employers or consumers. Now, of course, that's a very important point because in South Africa we don't have any kind of social security system for the unemployed. So, I mean, that's a way in which Germany is really in another planet compared to South Africa.
Thanks. 4 questions there. Can we have there, and then these in the front here? We'll come to you in the back just now.
Oh, well, first I would like to thank the presenters. It was really interesting. I would have liked to hear more. The 15 minutes not enough. I've got one question about the impact for each of you. It's slightly different. I'll start with Uma and Gabriela. Uma, what evidence is there of companies shopping around between regions, if there's such differences between regions, especially in some of the more mobile sectors or activities? Are companies relocating to a lower cost region? And do you know if there's differences in particular between domestic and foreign companies coming in? And a question also about the regional differences for Gabriela. Do you know of any evidence of the particular differences in the growth and demand across the region? So did demand grow more in the east where the impact was stronger? Can we break down the demand effect in any way? And then a question for Shan. I was trying to look whilst you're presenting for the proportion of informal workers in Malaysia. And interestingly, the 2012 ILO report doesn't have Malaysia on it. So can you maybe elucidate a little bit further on what did the World Bank say on the impact on the informal sector? Was there any proposed or predicted shift? Does the minimum wage make any provisions or expectations for future provisions for those workers who are either informally employed in formal operations or in informal operations?
Thank you. We've got a lot of questions already. I've kept track of them as well. Next one over here. And then we'll come to this side. Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to get an understanding, because seemingly the presentation about the minimum wage, it seems to be, especially Malaysia, it seems to cut across the sectors, whilst from where we're sitting as EFF in South Africa, we are proposing a minimum wage per sector. because you've got sectors that are more vulnerable than others. So I just want to get a sense on the logic of the blanket approach regarding the minimum wage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then there was a hand over here. Yes, this person here with the... And then we'll come to the two of you in the back in the next round.
Thank you for the opportunity. After having had the presentations from different countries, I was interested by the German one. It says it's a legal national minimum wage. Now I'm asking myself if ours, is it legal? As for me, 4.5, it's insulting as a national minimum wage. I'm trying to imagine a child from the university getting the job for the first time. And he goes there, they pay him 4,500. When he or she asks, that's not enough, they tell him it's a national minimum wage. Another one is that I think that 4.5 should be revisited as it doesn't cover the cost of living in this country. Thank you.
Maybe just one more, the gentleman with the grey beard, and then we'll go to the other two later.
Thank you. It's Phineas Malapela from Public and Allied Workers Union of South Africa. Yesterday I asked a question which was not answered. I thought it would be covered when the speakers were presenting. But it's not covered yet in terms of enforcement. I wanted to know as to whether or any international best example is existing in enforcement, especially on multinationals. Because multinationals, in most cases, are complying with minimum in their own countries. But when they get to the third world, they are not complying with that minimum. Even some of the South African countries after the new dispensation, they relocated to European countries. And then now they practice what is good there. But when it comes to the third world and us here, they don't comply with that. And that actually will be able to prevent even relocation from that other countries to the cheaper countries. So I just want to check as to whether there's anything, any means. In the past, we had the Sullivan Code during apartheid, which compels apartheid government to comply to some measures of labor law. But do we have any example now which can be followed? Thank you.
Thank you. What I want to just quickly do is those two people in the back, let them take and then we're going to stop it there because I'm sure we're not going to actually have a second round. There's not enough time. So I'll just take those two in the back. Sorry about the other people there. You can ask during the next sessions because some of these questions, including this enforcement one, will be picked up further. There's a special session, in fact, on enforcement later on. So can I just have those two on my left in the back and then we give the speakers a chance. Please be brief.
Okay, thanks so much. Mine is just an elementary question, but it's also quite linked to Lotta's contribution earlier. While we appreciate the implementation of a minimum wage, as a trade unionist, my question will be, how do you reconcile, actually the questions are targeted to the presenter from ILO and Malaysia. How do we then reconcile the benefits and disparities for those who operate within the formal economy, informal economy, and the unemployed in relationship to aspects like inflation? Because my assumption is once probably a minimum wage within a country goes up, then also probably to some extent inflation goes up. Unfortunately, I'm not a very true economist. I just understand economics from a small whatever. Then the practicalities from is this UMA. What are the practicalities of implementing a national minimum wage in a country like India, where 91% of the population, the working population, are found within the informal economy? And it's unfortunate that the data that you presented is quite outdated. I think it could have been very useful for us to have latest data around the formal employment within India. Maybe just to cut short. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. One last question there.
Thank you very much. My question or my wonder is that, for example, in South Africa, we've got a very huge influx of refugees who are not documented. And as a result, we'll find that labor provided by those people is highly exploited. And we begin to talk of a minimum wage. How really is this going to work in this economy? Because I tend to wonder how actually can we talk of a minimum wage if somebody who is documented is said to be given 4.5? What of somebody who just thinks he needs to be protected by his job and nothing else? I'm wondering.
Thank you very much. I'll just quickly recap. First question was on Malaysia and Germany. There were 4 questions, in fact. One, first one related to how was the level arrived at. So more about the formula, what proportion of workers were covered, and what proportion of the national median was covered. And then particularly on the German case, just a sort of more a comment about this possibility that the minimum wage constituted a way of getting over the German subsidy of the wage subsidy. Then on impact, there were questions particularly for India and for all 3, in fact. Firstly, with India, evidence of companies shopping around between regions. Germany, differences in growth in demand in different parts of Germany. Malaysia, what did the World Bank say about the informal sector? And I think on the informal sector, probably it can relate to that last point for India. You know, what do you do? How do you implement a national minimum wage when there's a very large informal sector? There was a question then about the experience of a national minimum, the justification of a national minimum wage that cuts across sectors rather than per sector. That was from the EFF representative. There was a comment on South Africa's concern whether 4,500 is a possibility. I don't know whether it's something you necessarily can interact with because it's very specific to our context, but maybe it can be picked up in the later discussions and during informal. But the point has certainly been lodged. Enforcement. Is there international best practice, particularly with regards to multinationals? And then with India and Malaysia, how do we reconcile benefits for formal, informal, and unemployed people? And then we've mentioned the informal economy. And then there was again a South African case, which you might not feel qualified to comment on, but you're welcome to, is how do we deal with undocumented refugees and how do we enforce, even if we have a national minimum wage, how do we enforce it? So you want to start here?
Thank you very much. On the first question, we actually, when we deliberated to implement the nationwide minimum wages, we wanted to have a guide. We didn't want to pick from the sky a rate and implement it. So we were guided by the technical committee, which I said just now comprised of experts in statistics, econometrics, and economies and whatnot. So they have come up with this formula, which is essentially looking at indicators reflecting employers' interest, the workers' interest, and the nation. And I've said the poverty line income, one of it, the productivity growth, the CPI, which is the inflation, the unemployment rate, and etc. So I'm not sure, I'm not from the technical committee, so we don't know where they pick up this formula from. So probably, I don't know, maybe they have got some guidance from somewhere. And what I came to know was that we tried as much as possible to benchmark our minimum wage against South Korea. So we did a few visits there, and the South Korean guys came and they looked at it, and maybe they picked up some points from there. So now the outcome of the formula was not 900 and 800. It is a bit higher. It was in the range of 1,000 ringgit and 1,100 ringgit. So that was the rate that we took to the cabinet. So somehow in the cabinet we have ministers there, and it was decided for a first time implementation. We used the guide as the formula, but the decision was we had to make it a bit lower, which was 900 ringgit and 800 ringgit. And as far as the median wage is concerned, whether the question that what amount of minimum wage constitute part of the median wage, it is 70%. 70% of the minimum wage that we have is median wage. That is, at that particular time in 2011 was 1,300 ringgit. That was the median wage. So the minimum wage was 900, so which was about 69%. And as far as mean wages is concerned, the minimum wage constitutes 50.7%. So which was to us at that particular time a bit high. But so far, as I said earlier, the early effects are not so much in the negative. And on the third question from you, the coverage that the minimum wage affected was about 2.5 million workers out of about 15 million workers that we have. The rest of them were earning more than 900 and 800. So I'm not sure what's the percentage. You can work it out. It's 3 million out of 15 million. And as far as informal workers are concerned, we have about 20 to 25% informal in the informal sector. And the World Bank in their report to us stated that if the minimum wage is placed above 900 ringgit, it will have severe impact on the employers. So they have used the CG model as what was explained by Asgar yesterday, and they have given us the simulation. If it is 700 ringgit, this will be the effect, 800, 900, 1,000, and etc. So we adopted the 900 as our guide, and they say that if the minimum wage is fixed for a first time, a very high rate, it will have a very great impact on the informal sector. There will be more workers going into informal, which we did not want. So we want as much as possible more workers to go into the formal sector. Now, there was one question on subsectors. I think I'm not supposed to answer, but just to give a quick, what we had earlier before 2012 is what you are having now in South Africa. The employment subsectoral minimum wage, I suppose. We had that earlier. We had a minimum wage by subsector, which was for the security guards sector, the shopkeepers, port workers, and hotel workers, restaurant workers. I guess we are both from the British colony. So generally, we had the same thing. What we found that the subsectoral minimum wage didn't really work for Malaysia. It was ineffective, and because the Wages Council that was supposed to be formed in the Wages Council Act, the earlier act wasn't really been an effective tool. There were still many workers who were having a low minimum wage. So we abolished that act. We put it away, and we introduced this act. And by way of this act, we introduced the existing minimum wage that we have now. Now, I think that's so much that I can share so now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the questions. Let me take Lara's question first. And I think I'd like to answer that in two parts. The first is with regard to domestic versus foreign companies. Is there some kind of a shopping going on? Now, yes, of course, there's a lot of shopping that goes on, but the shopping is not largely dependent on minimum wages. I think there are other concerns there. The first concern is land prices, whether they're going to get concessional land at a very low price. The second issue that comes up is that of whether they're going to get tax incentives or benefits. I think these two play a larger role. The third thing that plays a bigger role with regard to the labor is that of unionization. And what we have seen is that as the labor market, some of the labor market indicators are within the prerogative of the state governments, there have been a lot of amendments to the labor market as far as the labor reforms are concerned. And there, what we have seen over the last 25 years is that there have been a lot of exemptions, and there have been also a huge effort taken to not allow unionization in many of these firms. And I think that plays a larger role. Now, with regard to minimum wages, where it plays a larger role in India is with regard to a number of activities where the domestic players are involved. To simply take an example, there's something called as BD rolling, which is rolled cigarettes, traditionally done. And you find that across the states, there are some states that have implemented minimum wages for it, some states have not. So there's a tendency for work or activity to move from one state to the other. So that's an issue that we've been trying to deal with, and that's where the issue comes up saying, can we have a minimum wage for all states with regard to a particular activity or not? The other thing that has come up is, even if you have minimum wages for the same activity across two states, the differences in the minimum wages. So there has been a case in West Bengal where the unions have actually gone about trying to lobby, saying that, with the workers, saying that, hey, if you do not agree for 50% of the minimum wages, then we might lose a job, as the jobs might go to another state. So these are issues that we're grappling with, and that's where the whole national minimum wage debate actually comes into picture, saying, can we have a real low basic minimum? To the question of informal sector and how do we reconcile, as I very clearly pointed out, I think, or if I was not clear, let me put it again. The issue is that the minimum wages in India are for the schedules of employment, and it very clearly says it's for the unskilled workers. And much of this unskilled workers is actually in the informal economy or what is classified as class 4 workers in the formal economy. That's where the impacts are. And with regard to data, actually we in India do not have any yearly data on labor force. We have data collected every 5 years, so what I've shown is basically the latest. And over a period of 20 years, again, we do not find a huge difference with regard to the proportions who are in informal sector. With regard to how do you go about implementing it or making it applicable, I think that's where the whole question comes up of simplicity, having awareness campaigns and a whole lot of enforcement measures. And basically, what we have also seen is that social audits have played a very important role in many parts to ensure this implementation.
Thank you for the questions. I want to start with the second question about the regional differences and the differences in the company size. The question of the study was who earned less than €8.50 in 2014. And this is the effect, and this is taken as the effect of the minimum wage of €8.50. The difference between Eastern and Western Germany is historically. So it was the eastern part of Germany was the former Democratic Republic, the so-called socialistic part of Germany. And this is a long history because all the economy was destroyed after the reunification, and now they have less possibilities, they earn less, they are less organized in trade unions, And this is a problem of development. And so the minimum wage of €8.50 is also a possibility to equalize the living and working conditions in the still remaining, in a certain sense, two parts of Germany. And the small enterprises, I think this is not something very special for Germany, that small enterprises always, there is no workers' representation. The smaller the enterprise and the company is, the smaller is the workers' representation of the trade unions and so on, and the smaller is the number of trade union members, and so the wages traditionally are lower in the small enterprises. I think this is the reason for the high, that the smaller enterprises are more affected from the minimum wage. Then to the first questions. Why the conservative government, the conservative party in Germany, the Christian party in Germany was at least in favor for €8.50. I think €8.50 was set up rather politically. Because it was since a long time a trade union demand, and when we started with this demand, it was the limit to poverty wage. But when the law was realized and in force, it was much lower. So I think there was not too much calculation about this in this time, because even the more right-wing research institutes, there have been very much against, but they thought that €8.50 is low enough to create not too much troubles in economy. So I think the idea of saving money for the state, this is not the main reason, because with a minimum wage of €8.50, there is not so much money saved, because €8.50 is still to be subsidized. In Germany, the social benefits is for everybody who is living legally in Germany, not only for the workers. And when you work, you have your wage, and then the subsidies are on top of the wage. And I think the idea is, for a full-time work, you should have a wage of a decent wage that makes you live from this amount of the wage. And because on the other side, the social benefits are paid from the taxes we pay all, and the taxes make subsidies to the enterprises who profit from the low wages. And in the context of the decline of the coverage of collective bargainings and so on, there was no wage floor, and the wages have gone lower and lower. And I think even the Christian party at least wanted to save the votes, because otherwise they would have stopped to be a popular party, and it was less or more a political reason to agree to the minimum wage at least.
Can I just briefly add one more point? I think I forgot just now. The enforcement on M&As, as far as Malaysia is concerned, we don't have much issue of non-compliance of minimum wage by multinationals. Generally, they are well represented in many federations of American chambers of commerce, South Korean chambers of commerce, and other countries. And we don't have much issues with MNCs not complying with minimum wage. We have given them lots of briefing, guides, and engagement sessions with them. But our issue of non-compliance is more towards SMEs, small, medium enterprises. So they have some issues of non-ability to pay. So the compliance rate is a bit high on the SMEs, but not on MNCs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please join me in saying thank you once again to our guests. It's about 12 minutes past. If we could be back just after 12:30.